What's up, fourth grade? We are looking at the sheet mixed fractions number line. That's the same thing as saying mixed numbers number line. We've already done fractions on a number line. Now we're just going to look when there is a mixed number. So we follow the same process that we followed before. And the first thing we're going to do is circle our wholes. So I have the whole 1 and the whole 2. That's where I'm going to start. I can see that I have the whole 3 down here, but I'm going to wait on that, and I'm just going to look between 1 and 2. And first I have to figure out what my denominator is, so I'm going to count the swoops in a low voice. So I put my pencil on the 1 and count the swoops. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that means for every mark, my denominator is going to be 8. 8, 8. Go ahead and fill in all of your 8s there. Now, since my fraction is starting at 1, I'm going to have to put a 1 in front of every single fraction. So it's going to be 1 and something over 8. Now that I have that part, I need to fill in my numerator. So this would be 1 and 1/8, because remember over here we would have 8/8. That would be 1. Then 1 and 1/8. 1 count in a high voice. 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8. And there we go. I have all of my mixed numbers in between 1 and 2. So when I get to 2, it would be 1 and 8/8. And this 8/8 equals a whole. So really, this number is 2, which makes sense because it's down there. So now just to make sure that my spaces are even, I'm going to count my swoops again, but this time in between the 2 and the 3. So I get my low voice ready, and here I go. Pen on the 2, start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So my denominator is 8, and that makes sense. Now I know that everything past this 2 is going to be 2 as part of my mixed number. So I'm going to put 2 for every single point. And I know my denominator is 8, so I'll put that for every single point too. Then I have to go ahead and in my high voice count my denominator. So this is going to be 2 and 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8. And then here when I get to 3, I know this is like 2 and 8/8. That 8/8 is a whole. So it would change my 2 to a 3, which makes sense because, like I said, there's 3. Now that I have all of my mixed numbers on the line, I'm going to go ahead and label on the sheet. So I need to look for all of my denominators that have 8 in it, because that is what matches my number line. So I know I can do 2 and 5/8 really easily. I can do 1 and 3/8, 2 and 1/8, 1 and 7/8, 2 and 7/8, 1 and 5/8, and 1 and 1/8. Those will be really easy for me. So go ahead and pause the video and just label those, then come back and check your work. Alright, take a minute, pause the video again, check your work, make sure you got all of the letters the same as me. Those were the easy ones because I just needed to look on my number line. But if we look at our example here, this 1 and 1/4, it says that it's B, but I don't have 1 and 1/4 anywhere on my number line because my denominators are all in 8ths. So I'm going to need to make an equivalent fraction, which is an equal fraction made by multiplying or dividing both parts. So I need to change my fraction 1/4 into something over 8. I know 4 times 2 will get me to 8, so I can multiply by 2 over 2 to get 2/8. So this would be 1 and 2/8, which if I look on my line is right here, B. So that makes sense. Let's try it with 2 and 3/4. I have to take 3/4 and change it to 8s. I know I can multiply by 2 over 2 to get 6/8, and my whole is 2. So I'm looking for 2 and 6/8 on my number line, which I can see right here. So I'm going to label this M. Coming down here to 1 and 1/2, I need to change my 1/2 to an 8. I know 2 times 4 will get me to 8, so I can multiply by 4 over 4. 1 times 4 is 4, 2 times 4 equals 8. So I'm looking for 4/8, my whole is 1. So looking on my number line, here is 1 and 4/8. I'm going to label that D. 2 and 1/2, I just already did this, so I know I can multiply 1/2 times 4 over 4 to get 4/8. This time my whole is 2. So I'm looking for 2 and 4/8, which I see right here. I'm going to go ahead and label that K. One more, 2 and 1/4. I'm going to change my fraction 1/4 into 8 by multiplying by 2 over 2. 1 times 2 equals 2. 4 times 2 equals 8. My whole is 2. So I'm looking for 2 and 2/8, which I see right here. I'm going to go ahead and label that I. Looking down at this bottom part, we have to compare the fractions using less than, greater than, and equal to symbols. We can use our calculator to help us turn fractions or mixed numbers into decimals and then compare the decimals. So if you happen to have your school calculator with you right now, to check this, you would 1 and 3/4 to compare it to 1 and 6/8. I'm going to start with 1 and 3/4, and I would type in 1. Then I would type in the unit button. Then 3 and hit numerator. 4, hit denominator. Then I'm going to hit the equal sign. Then I'm going to come up here to my fraction to decimal button. And once I do that, it is going to give me the decimal 1.75. Then I can do it again for 1 and 6/8. So I hit 1, unit, 6, numerator, 8, denominator, equals. Then I hit my fraction to decimal button, and I am going to get 1 and 75/100, or 1.75. Now I'm comparing 1.75 is the same as 1.75, so I put an equal sign there. Okay, I went ahead and used my calculator to get all of the decimals, so now we can just compare. So if I'm looking at 2 and 1/8 and 2 and 1/4, if I change it to decimal, I see the 2 is the same, so I can label that S for the same. Then the 1 is different than the 2. The 2 is bigger, so I put in a less than sign. 2 and 12/100 is less than 2 and 25/100. Looking at the next one, I didn't actually put in my decimals because I can tell right away by just looking at my wholes. I have 1 whole and 2 wholes, and I know 2 wholes is going to be bigger. So 1 and 7/8 is less than 2 and 1/14. Over here, when I changed it to decimals for 2 and 5/8 and 2 and 1/2, I can see that I have 2 decimals, 2 points to the right of the decimal point in the first one, and only 1 and 2.5. So I'm going to add a 0 to the end so I can compare. Now I can see 62 and 50. 62 is bigger, so 2 and 62/100 is greater than 2 and 1/2. Looking at 1 and 3/8 and 2 and 3/8, I can just look at my wholes, 1 and 2. I know my 2 is bigger. So 1 and 3/8 is less than 2 and 3/8. Over here, 1 and 2/4 changes to 1.5. 1 and 2/8 changes to 1.25. So there's 2 digits here. I need to make 2 digits over on this side. So I'm going to add a 0, and I know 50/100 is bigger than 25/100. So 1 and 50/100 is greater than 1 and 25/100. Over here, 2 and 2/8 and 2 and 1/4. If I look at my decimals, it's the same, the same, the same, the same, the same. So they are equal, which means 2 and 2/8 and 2 and 1/4 are equivalent fractions. 1 and 62/100 is less than 1 and 75/100. For my next one, I can just look at my wholes. 2 and 1, 2 is greater. So 2 and 7/8 is greater than 1 and 7/8. 1 and 3/4 changes to 1 and 75/100. 1 and 4/8 change to 1 and 5/10. We have 2 to the right of the decimal point, so I need to have 2 over here too. And I can tell that 75/100 is greater than 50/100. Over here, I have the same, the same, the same, the same. So I'm going to put in an equal sign. And then finally, I can look at my wholes for this last one. 1 and 2, 2 is greater. So 1 and 6/8 is less than 2 and 2/8. All right, great job. Flip the page. On the last page, we are using number lines to write mixed numbers. Here, we're going to use it to do improper fractions and regular fractions. So number 1 is just a review for you, but we'll do it together real quick. You circle your wholes, 0 and 1. Count your denominators, put your pencil on the 0, count the swoops. 1, 2, 3, 4. So your denominator is going to be 4 for every point. Then you're going to count up the numerators. Now here's 0, so this is going to be 0/4. Then 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. And 4/4 makes sense because that is 1, which is right down here. And then I can just go ahead and label my points. A is right here, 1/4. B is right here. Now that's 2/4, but that fraction can be simplified. To simplify a fraction, I want to get the smallest fraction possible. So I'm going to try to get a 1 on top. To do that, I'm going to see if I can divide by 2 over 2. 2 times 1 gets me to 2. 2 times 2 gets me to 4. So my answer here simplified is 1/2. 2/4 is also correct. That's our equivalent fraction. And then finally C right here, that is 3/4. So that's just a review for you. Number 1 is the same as number 2 and number 5. So now that I've showed you how to do number 1, you should be able to do those other 2 on your own. For number 3, instead of making a regular fraction or a proper fraction, and instead of making a mixed number, I'm going to show you how to look at a number line with improper fractions. So your first step of the process stays the same. Circle your first wholes. We have 0 and 1. Put your pencil on the 0, count the swoops. 1, 2. We know our denominator is going to be 2 here. I'm putting in my 2's. With 0, it's going to be 0 over 2. Then I'm going to add in my numerators. 1, 2. Now that I've got that, I'm going to look for my next hole. My next hole is over here, 2. I'm going to count my swoops. 1, 2. So the denominator is the same, 2, 2. This time, I'm just going to keep going with my numerators. I have 1, 2. So my next one would be 3, 4. And now you can see that I have improper fractions, more than 1, because the 3 is bigger than the 2, and the 4 is bigger than the 2. Now I'm going to go ahead and label my numbers here. So G is right here. That's 1/2. So I can put 1/2 for G. H, I can see, is right here. It's 3 over 2. But I know I'm not really supposed to ever answer in an improper fraction, so I can use my calculator trick to simplify this. And if I do, I will get 1 and 1/2. So either of those answers is good. This is the simplified, better answer, so you don't answer with an improper fraction. For number 4, we're going to follow the same process. Circle the first holes, 0 and 1. Then let's figure out what our denominator is. Put your pencil on the 0, count 1, 2, 3, 4. So for each mark, I'm going to put my denominator is 4. Then I can go ahead and look at my next hole, 1 and 2, and count up my denominators again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Makes sense. It's going to be 4s all the way down the line. All right, I'm going to go ahead and fill in my numerator. I know here has to be 0/4 because that's 0. And I'm just going to go ahead and start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm going to just double check to make sure that makes sense. I see my 1 right here has the fraction 4/4, and that makes sense because 4 over 4 is 1. So let me go ahead and label here. I is right here, 2/4. So I'll write 2/4, but I want to simplify it so I can get the smallest possible fraction. I can tell that dividing by 2 over 2 will work for both. So 2 times 1 equals 2, 2 times 2 equals 4. So 1/2 is my simplified answer. 2/4 will work too. If I look at J, that's right here. It's 7/4. I can see it's an improper fraction. So I'm going to write that on the line, but I know I'm not supposed to answer in an improper fraction. So I'm going to use my calculator to simplify it and make it into a mixed number. That would look like 1 3/4. Either of these answers are correct because they're equivalent fractions, but the mixed number is the better way to answer. Last one, number 6. In class, right between M and N, we should have drawn a 1 in here. So if you didn't do that, do it now. And then we can follow our steps. Circle the first holes, 0 and 1. Put your pencil on the 0, count the swoops. 1, 2, 3. So my denominator is going to be 3. Circle the next hole, 2. Count the swoops again. 1, 2, 3. My denominator stays 3, so I know it makes sense. Now I can go ahead and fill in my numerator. I know I'm going to have a 0 here because that's 0. And then I start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Check to see if it makes sense. I see at 1, I have the fraction 3 over 3, which makes sense because that's 1. And every fraction after that has a bigger number in the numerator. It's an improper fraction because it's bigger than 1. Now I can go ahead and label M is 2/3. So I can write that on my line. And N is 4/3. So I'm going to write that, but I see it's an improper fraction, so I need to simplify it to a mixed number. To do that, if you plug that into your calculator, you will get 1 1/3. Either of those answers are correct. 1 1/3 is the simplified way, so you don't answer in an improper fraction because that is just rude, isn't it? All right, great job with these number lines. I will catch up with you later.